Welcome to the About podcast. Here we explore your financial health in simple and easy to understand ways.
Well, hey everybody, and welcome back to the About podcast, where we have another episode in our sort of continuing series focus on the specific needs of widows and widowers. And today we're talking about the financial and estate planning needs of that particular group. As always, I'm Jeremy Scott, joined by Roy Hucke. Roy, what do we got today?
Hey man, we got a good one today. I'm really excited because we have Tom and Brian from Knox Law. They're going to be talking to us about that specific topic, and they don't know it, but I have a really unique story to share with them today that I really want their perspective on because it was kind of tragic.
We will not be soliciting free legal advice in this podcast, but we do have some questions.
We do have some questions for you. So Tom, Brian, take it. Give us a little bit more introductions about yourselves and your firm.
Well, thank you. My name is Tom Hoffman. I'm an attorney at the Knox Law Firm in Erie, Pennsylvania. And I've been practicing law since 1991, so my 35th year. I'm a recovering CPA. I started at Ernst & Young down in Pittsburgh and moved up to Erie in 1993, and many years of practicing law with a real important focus on asset protection planning for both married couples and widow and widowers. And actually, there's a lot more abuse that happens and issues on long-term on asset protection planning for a widow or widower because they don't have that spouse to rely upon for fortification under stressful circumstances. So, Brian, you could introduce yourself.
Yep. My name is Brian Seelinger. I'm a newer addition to Knox Law, but prior to my law career, I was an entrepreneur in the IT space, as well as a portfolio manager in a regional trust department with fiduciary powers. In addition, I also have a chartered financial analyst charter, CPA, and a host of other financial designations from my previous careers.
The listeners should look him up because there's an alphabet after his name.
I was going to say, my goodness.
You're kind of a smart cookie is what it sounds. Do you have a CFP, Brian?
I do.
Oh my God. I'm so inadequate now.
By
the way, my partner's a CFA and in my company, and I'm the CFP, and you're all of that. And you have your CPA?
CPA and a couple other as well. And I teach at Penn State as well.
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, Brian, we're glad to have you because you are a superior expert. And Tom, I'm really glad and appreciate that you made him wear a suit today.
Yeah. we only bring in the heavy hitters here on the About podcast.
That's right. That's right. So, all right. So to kind of to launch this, we at my firm here, I'm in Johnstown, Colorado, and we really kind of focus on helping essentially widows and widowers and single people later in life. It just seems to be the clientele that we really get a lot of, and it is, at some point, everyone's going to deal with that anyway. So for us to be able to help with their unique needs is really important to me, and one of the areas I really do focus on. So I want to start with a story a little bit because this just happened, and I want to kind of talk about why is this so important to have these conversations, and blended families are a thing. Jeremy, do you have a blended family?
I do have a blended family. As of the last 2 years, we're on year number 2. Actually, we were 2-year anniversary of buying our house and moving in together was June this year.
And would you say you had kind of a unique solution to your estate planning needs at the end of the day when we looked at it?
We did have to do some unique work in our estate planning. We've talked about that before in previous episodes on the podcast, but yeah, it was quite a ball of twine to untwine once we figured out all the dynamics, because for our listeners probably know this, for you guys, for our guests, I was widowed 3 years ago, and remarried recently. So have kind of been the one lived through this recently, and I thought it was complicated before, but nothing compared to.
Well, and you have older kids, she has younger kids, so there's this a little bit of a dynamic that's unique because.
Yeah. And she's divorced, so her ex-husband's still around and in the picture and part of the equation. Obviously, my late wife is not. So it's just a whole thing. It was a whole thing.
So Tom and Brian, do you guys have any unique personal experiences with blended families?
I have lots of experiences with blended families in my professional practice, not in my personal life, but definitely in my extended family life. Yes, and a lot of blended families come out of obviously the widower-widower situation, which is part of the conversation. Jeremy, sorry to hear that is one of your circumstances. So, so do you want to share any more about what you're thinking about, or do you want me to go on about how we work on those situations?
Well, I want to share my story, and then I want to hear you talk about the whole kit, right? Because at the end of the day, that's really what we want to get to. But this story is just, it's just so fresh to me that I just really want to kind of put it out there and get your insight on how you kind of help people with this. And Brian, do you have any blended family experience personally?
I was a child in a couple different blended families, as my father tended to get married multiple times.
All right. Well, there you go. So this is very intimate probably for you then in that regard. So the situation I had was this, where a couple got married back in the 90s, and they were blended at that point in time, 2 kids on one side, 1 on the other. And they agreed that because the kids were still in the house and living at home and that they were together over 30 years, that they agreed that, we'll just split things 3 ways. And there was some trust involved and planning in that regard that was done. It was actually very good in regards to the planning piece of it. But unbeknownst to one of the parties, I'm not going to say, I'm just trying to be very vague so that nobody knows who this is. But one of the parties changed what their trust said, and it went to their child only instead of 3 ways like they'd agreed. And they only found this out because one of them passed away, and they were kind of blindsided with that revelation at that time. And so the surviving spouse is definitely going through this emotional feeling of betrayal, complete betrayal, because it was done behind their back, and their perception is that the kids in this situation knew that they had to have that change done, so they were not oblivious to that fact.
Right.
Meaning that it was, it's kind of done purposefully and intentionally, right? So there's just this intense feeling of betrayal now that is going on, and then the survivor has to make all these decisions based off of that. Now, the cool thing is that all the things were left for the spouse. Like, all the money was left to the benefit of the spouse, right? Mm-hmm. But then upon the spouse's death, the surviving spouse's death, then it goes to that side of the family only. And that's where the betrayal comes in for them. So I'm sure you guys have seen this before, but you're dealing with not only these blended families and the emotions of these blended families. How do you help people, 1, if they're in that situation, deal with that? But then 2, what do you do on the front end to make sure that doesn't happen? Because I know there are ways to do that, but that's why you guys, because you're really good at this stuff.
So certainly there are legal tools that can be instituted to avoid having one spouse change their estate plan. It gets a lot more complicated. A classic approach would be a joint revocable trust, so that both spouses have to concur on the amendment of that trust in order to change the dispositive provisions. Another approach could be a contract to make a will or a trust. So those are approaches that are all viable. They are a lot more work. So one thing we know at blended families is the estate plans are 3 or 4 times harder than the classic nuclear family. And I'm guessing, Jeremy, that's what you found when you started going through it.
Yeah, for sure. And that was where having somebody to help, working with Roy and having somebody to help was really helpful, because you can see the surface complication, but then you start going through all like the scenarios and the what ifs. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. What if she goes first, but her ex-husband's still in the picture? But what if her ex-husband predeceases her? Then what happens? And the kids are still at home, but maybe they're not at home, or maybe only one of them's at home and my kids are only gone. And it was just this like, oh my gosh, the web of possibility. And honestly, when you've lived through worst case scenario as far as I'm concerned. 3 years ago, I'm just like, no, we're talking about it all. We're gonna have a contingency for it all.
It's real to you.
It's very real, and I'm like, I don't want to mess this up. I want to make sure everybody's taken care of.
So there's also obviously a post-nuptial agreement you can do as well. So all those things are available to make sure that the spouse that survives would have an enforceable legal ability to make sure that the dispositive provisions that was agreed to continues. Probably the most popular, though, is a joint revocable trust. They are a lot more complicated. Much like doing planning for a blended family is a lot more complicated than for a classic nuclear family without any blending. One of the things that we like to do, if at all possible, whatever direction we decide to go, is to include, if the children are old enough, to include the children in the planning if the parents will authorize it. It always works better, and I think some of you mentioned, Roy, was the hurt and the surprise that all occurred when this revelation occurred. So in part, with regard to the planning, if everybody is part of the conversation, it makes it harder to go outside of that element. Legally, though, of course you can't if you have a binding agreement through any one of those tools I'd already mentioned. Again, we typically mostly use the joint revocable trust and require both spouses to execute for there to be a change that they can be authorized. It's going to be more complicated if you have a federally taxable estate because there are gift tax and estate tax issues associated with those. But that's a bridge we can cross later on. And what we also then have to be on guard for, which may have occurred in that circumstance that you mentioned, Roy, is undue influence, right? So we look a lot at asset protection and why did that first spouse to die change their plan? Were they unduly influenced by somebody, probably most likely the people that left the assets to change that plan and not, of course, tell the other party. So when we are looking at a husband and wife that say it's a nuclear family, and you sort of pre-planned, right? So somebody's going to die, right? You don't know when. You could be a 30-year-old couple. It could be a 60-year-old couple. It could be an 80-year-old couple. At some point, unless the beer truck runs over their vehicle and they're right next to each other, they're going to there's going to be a widow or a widower. And creating a irrevocable trust on the death of the first spouse is an outstanding way to avoid unplanned consequences. So, for example, was that circumstance you mentioned, Roy, were those widow and widowers, or were they just blended family divorces, stuff like that?
And specifically in what regard?
So the blended family, were they both widowers, widowers, or were they divorcees?
Don't actually know that, but I'm assuming they were divorcees. They didn't talk about deaths or anything like that.
So in planning, frankly, planning that someday, either the husband or the wife is going to be a widow or a widower, we typically like to fund a trust upon the death of the first spouse. Which would be either through a revocable trust or a will. There are specific advantages for Medicaid planning if you use a testamentary trust versus a revocable trust. It's a classic A-B scenario, right? So you have a credit shelter trust. We're really, for a lot of people, because the $15 million exemption that's available today, a lot of people don't have to worry about that. But we have found that planning provides excellent asset protection for the future widow or widower. And it allows them to resist the potential urge into the future of retitling those assets in a future spouse's name or having those assets be subject to equitable division if they do remarry, then ultimately get divorced. Because in most states, those assets would be exempt from that circumstance. So that is an outstanding tool. And then, of course, as we were talking about, if once you are a widow or a widower, if you have that type of a funded trust that has the flexibility to make distributions to yourself, potentially to children, depending upon how it's drafted, also appoint that property for children in the future, it makes it easier to reverse if there ever was any undue influence. And that could, of course, happen. We see a lot of that happening with fraud, right? So you've got just basic fraud where people are calling up, pretending to be somebody else, pretending to be a grandchild, pretending to be any circumstance where they're going to be helpful. And then also we've had a lot of circumstances where we got a widow or widower, the children live abroad or far enough away. The person down the street befriends them. Next thing you know, they've got a power of attorney, and next thing you know, there are gifts made to them, and then the will changes. And so the nice thing about that testamentary or trust that could be created on the revocable trust for the benefit of the surviving spouse is that those cases, those trusts are a lot easier to defend. And it's easier to reverse if there ever was any undue influence in that regard. So it's a very useful tool that I think a lot of attorneys don't think about because they primarily allow the planning for funding on the first spouse to die to be predicated on do you need it for federal state tax purposes, as opposed to a lot of other life circumstances where really the primary goal is asset protection. So those are some of the important tools that we like to use. Have you guys seen that used much in that regard?
Yeah, a little bit for sure. But I have a question in my head as you're talking here that I really want to ask you is for our listeners, because this is real. When you have the person that you see is getting it's elder abuse really is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
But if somebody sees someone like, hey, now they got this person doing power of attorney and they've got the gifts going out, what do our listeners do if they witness that? What can they do?
So there is an epidemic in our country of people who are suffering from diminished capacity, but still have legal capacity. And that is where there is grave concern, right? And that's exactly what you were talking about. So you've got mom or dad, great Aunt Agatha, whatever it might be, who is now north of 80, now north of 85. The world gets smaller. They need help. There's the neighbor, and the vast majority of people who step in and help are wonderful people who would take a bullet for those people. But there's unfortunately a percentage that are there to take advantage of that circumstance for themselves. And it's almost always the same playbook. Over the course of a 6 to 12 to 24 months, that person starts speaking more about the neighbor down the street. And then the neighbor down the street starts spending a lot more social time with them. And it all sounds good, right? Because they're lonely and it's easy to do. But it's important to be on guard for where that gets you. And that is also where a revocable trust for the widow or widower can come in very handy, because they can appoint their child as co-trustee, and then the child would have a much better clarity and vision as to what would be going on in the context of that revocable trust, because they would get notice of anything going on, transfers, withdrawals, as if something becomes unusual. It's also very good to alert the financial institutions and the financial advisors, because they're really almost always the first line of defense. I would say the attorneys are, if not last, they're close to last to find out about these things. And then reversing those things are much harder. So it's really important to have those estate planning tools out there, but even more importantly, to work as a team. So if you got the financial advisor, you've got the CPA, the attorney, and the family involved, it makes for a much more robust wall of defense around that person whose capacity as they age is naturally becoming weakened. And so at least currently in my practice, in my personal life, between 80 and 85, there's a big difference in the ability to make good decisions. and people feel themselves slipping and they don't want to make decisions. Or they will offload the responsibility of making decisions, and that's in particularly where somebody who desires to engage in undue influence and reap the benefits of fraudulent behavior can step in and become overly involved. And it's really easy to do if you have an older person that is more isolated, family lives away, financial advisor lives away, or that elderly person that her and her husband or vice versa, whoever is the widow or widower, they had that financial advisor and a CPA that were their dear friends. They may even socialize together. And then, of course, if you're 85 and your financial advisor and CPA were contemporaries of yours, well, they're retired too, right? So now you're on to either somebody else at the same firm that you may or may not know very well, and you don't have that same close connection. So the best way to protect against those circumstances is with a team. And I really think it starts with a financial advisor. The financial advisor should be seeing or talking to the clients. You tell me, Roy, how often do you talk to your clients?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's frequent, right?
Very.
And the interesting thing is, I'm not in a big box firm, right? I'm an independent advisor, and we know our clients, and we know our clients' voices. Mm-hmm. So that's actually really important because it's harder to have that fraud that you were referencing a little bit earlier happen because of that.
Right.
But if we have unique situations like, whoa, alarm bells up, and we need to talk to the people,
right.
Whoever the people are in this situation, we need to engage, even if they're not legally, let's say on the account, let's engage mom. And then hey, do you think we should maybe talk with the kids on this one? And we try and bring them in, right? Because I can't legally talk to them without her approval. But that's an important piece of it. But one of the issues I'm running into is what a lot of people are starting to not have kids.
Yeah.
Or it's even worse than that. They have kids, but the kids aren't in their life at all. And they're like, who do I have as my power of attorney? Who do I have as my people who I can have trust around me? Because what I've actually seen, this spurred, right? Like you have this elderly neighbor, right? Like Jeremy, let's say you have an elderly neighbor and you're witnessing that neighbor age. And then one day you have these people you don't know showing up, right? And it's someone that they met somewhere. And now that's the person that's, doing the undue influence and fraud and stuff. And like, how do we help these people to protect themselves? And ultimately, it's like you almost have to like declare them unable to make decisions for themselves. But how do you do that as a caring neighbor?
Well, I've seen it in the church. So, our listeners know this. I'm not sure if you do. I'm a pastor is my day job. And, obviously we work and talk. I'm going to go this afternoon and do a bunch of visits to people who, live in assisted living or shut-in type folks and all that kind of stuff. But not so much, not here, but in a previous church experience, I did have a situation where I'm like, I don't know who this person is who's starting to show up with, not Mabel was not her name, and sitting by them in church and, all this. And I'm like, oh, who is this? And it's like, is your son or your cousin or your nephew? And she's like, no, it's my neighbor. They've been helping me out. And there was a whole thing that came out of that. And, but even like in the church world, we're really excited to see people, get involved and volunteer and help. But now as part of like the ethical trainings that I have to do, one of the things that, we've been on the lookout for people who have maybe bad intent when they want to work with children. And now one of the things that clergy are getting trained is helping to maybe spot those situations where people who want to work with the elderly maybe don't have the best intention, because that's the other vulnerable population you find in the church.
And I think I'll let Brian talk a second here, but I think with regard to the elderly and the young, what you see is that a predator wants to isolate, right? Mm-hmm. So they want to become the advisor for that person, because if you have checks and balances in place, it's much harder to defraud or embezzle or be a predator. So, but I know Brian's got some important ideas too.
It's related to what Tom just said. We have to remember that these predators are not applying to the rational facilities of the individual, whether if they're young or old. They're attacking the emotional feelings of the victim.
And the weakness.
And that is their weakness. That's something, if you're young, you don't have the capability to understand what's going on, or if you're old, you're desperate for that contact. So a lot of times when, especially if they don't have close family, they're going to be very, very reactive to any attempt to potentially cast ill intent on their new best friend. So one of the things that you can do is every state has, either under the Attorney General's office or Department of Health and Human Services, like an elder care 800 reporting line that is anonymous, where you can report what you're seeing, and they will come and they will look at it, that situation, conduct interviews, and at least provide a stopgap measure, because obviously if the authorities are looking at someone has ill intent, they're going to move on just like a burglar would to the easier target for them, rather than risk being exposed.
Yeah, and I've seen I've seen a lot.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot, because on the flip side of that coin, I had a client who was getting dementia. He was caring for his ailing wife, who was physically unable to do things and kind of at her end of days, and she ended up passing. But the caretaker that was coming in, the husband who had dementia, really thought that this person was doing bad things. But in the scheme of things, she was the caretaker person coming in was actually like saying like, "Hey, he's losing his capacity."
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
he did not want to hear that, right?
Yeah.
And so the flip side of the coin occurred too, where he was like, "This person is bad," and making claims against them when they were truly trying to look out for their best interest. So it is such a slippery slope on both sides of this coin.
Roy, that's a really important point you made, because there's two sides to every coin, and it's, you got to look at both sides and try to understand where the truth is. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I just think it just says, I mean, it's just how messy things get. And I think if you haven't lived through it or seen a loved one live through it, or maybe your mom or your dad or your grandma go through it, it can be easy to ignore like how messy things can get, especially towards the end of life. But I think it just speaks to why planning ahead is so really important, and running through all those scenarios that you made me and my new wife run through, because nobody wants to imagine it, but things do get messy quick, even with just normal nuclear families. But you throw like a blended family in there, or you throw, a widower that's not at a time of life that's expected. I mean, I was not expecting that in my mid 40s. Then things get messy quickly. And so this is like planning, this is why you plan.
I know we're like painting this really messy Picasso for everybody.
Right.
It's just like disastrous. We're like, this is why though you do have to engage with the planning process, because I'm curious, Tom and Brian, how many times have you met with a client, their blended family, you're presenting them with decision points, and they're like, we need to talk about it. We need to think about it. But the reality is they don't want to talk and think about it. They don't know what to do. And having the conversation around, like, I don't want your children to get all of my money when I die. I had a situation where it was a blended family, but it was only blended on one side. There was kids from one side, not the other side.
Right.
And the other side had a pretty good, business sale. But having the conversation with his current wife that I don't want everything to go to your children upon my passing. I'd like my family, my siblings, my nieces and nephews to get something. Mm-hmm. They just don't want to have the conversation because it's very uncomfortable. And how do you have that conversation? I'm like, what do you guys do in that situation where they don't make a decision and they just sit there and you're talking to them 2 years later and they still haven't made a decision?
That's a challenge for sure. We do, I hate to keep on being a dead horse, but the best way to do it is a team. So as I mentioned already, the financial advisor sees the client more often than we do. We try to engage with the rest of the family too. Right, because transparency is the best thing you can have if the client will let you do it. So as an attorney, it's attorney-client privilege, but we request, if at all possible, for the client to invite other people to participate in that process. Again, at a minimum, the attorney, the financial advisors, the CPA, and then family. And oftentimes, when you have that conversation, Roy, with them, then you say, "Hey, can we get a child from each of your blended family? From each the husband and wife's family, sort of be the representatives, participate in the planning process." That has worked out very well. I always ask, do they get along? And sometimes the answer is they get along swimmingly well. Sometimes the answer is they really don't know each other very well, but they get along. And sometimes the answer is no. And yet you have to obviously react to that. And usually the worst case scenario is you have the team approach with the professionals, which helps out because, frankly, if the family complains about a decision that's made later on, and it was fully vetted amongst the team, and whether they're complaining about what the CPA did or the financial planner did or the attorney did, the whole team's there going to be able to say, look at their notes, say, no, that was fully discussed, and this was your mom or dad's true intention, and there was nobody leading anybody around with any nefarious issues, which of course that team doesn't have any skin in the game anyways. So that there's no additional benefit to them doing that. But the point being is that the most important element of the goal is that the client is making their own decisions without undue influence. And so that team approach helps to make sure that it's the client's plan. And we can all go to sleep at night feeling really good knowing that you're doing what the client wants with the client's resources, and it's their unilateral decision without undue influence.
And usually those conversations with clients come down to determining the difference between equal and fair.
Good point.
Right? So usually that's where the client needs advice from the team. And that just escalates if, for example, you mentioned that there was a sale of a business, but if there's still a business in the family, that even becomes more prevalent. And that is an area that, Knox, particularly Tom, have a great deal of experience in, is transitioning the businesses, and preparing for that before an emergency. Because if you wait until some unexpected event happens, you're almost always too late.
So if we have this starting with a nuclear family and as a closely held family business, then we like to have in the estate documents, I think I may have mentioned to you before, a special business trustee or a committee of special business trustee to assist, in particularly the non-equity owner spouse or the non-participating spouse, if they're the surviving spouse, about how to deal with the business. And then, if those assets do go into a trust, which we'd recommend, some version of a testamentary trust under a revocable trust, it protects that family business from outside influence that could result in it moving outside of the intentions of the deceased spouse. So that has worked out very well. And then if you do have a spouse, a widow or a widower that has the business that they've inherited, either in trust, our preference, or outright, because that's the way it may be, then working with the team and including a business consultant about how to go forward. Do you sell the business? Do you do what we like to do, which is keep the business in the family but professionalize the management, utilizing our family private enterprise model? Those are all the types of things we do when you get beyond a family that just has a healthy portfolio, but also a family business.
Like we've been talking about, from the beginning, we talked about like asset and asset protection. And I think one of the things that people who are not maybe haven't spent a lot of time on their financial life or financial planning side of things, maybe haven't, is what constitutes an asset, right? And so a currently running business, may be something that it's kind of funny to say you might overlook it, but you do have to have a plan for that. And I will say, like, in my personal situation, like when I was sitting down with Roy and my wife now, like one of the sticking points for me that I didn't really think about was the IRA that I hold. That's all of my late wife's retirement money. And so obviously like plan A is me and my wife now will retire on that and, use it to have a nice retirement and be comfortable and all that. And that's wonderful. But then I'm like, well, wait a minute. What happens if something happens to me before we retire, say? I'm like, well, like, I don't want, it's part of my current wife's retirement plan, involves that money, but at the same time, it was my kids' mom's retirement money. So I feel like, how do we make everybody whole? And so it gets kind of sticky fast. And I didn't even really think about that as, an asset that needed to be thought through and protected or whatever, but it is. And that was the first of like the handful of like, oh yeah, what about this and what about that? And then we had to get into some more creative ideas on what happens, especially if something like, say for me, like would happen to one of us sooner than maybe we might expect. So, but I think for people at home listening to this, like when you think about assets, you might think, well, I'm not a business owner, or whatever, and I'll have things like that. But chances are you've got something, the equity in your house. How is that going to work? Especially if maybe you've 20 years you paid the mortgage with your first spouse, and then you got remarried and you've only paid the mortgage with this next spouse for the next 5, right? Like what is equitable versus what's fair, in that situation, especially if there's kids involved. Again, it gets messy.
I really like the fair concept, though. You guys are very right that
Yeah.
It's not always about what's equal.
Yeah.
It's about what is fair in the situation. And when it's in the light and people know what's going on, they don't need to know numbers per se, right? I always tell the parents, like, you don't have to tell them the numbers, but let's just talk about the concepts,
Right.
and why they're doing what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that this, the first story I opened up with, the guy who feels betrayed, he's going to now have to change his trust that he has, because he's like, I'm not going to, it's not even equal at all at this situation, right? So, but now he's got to change that. And like, what if he had diminished capacity and he couldn't change it? Now what, right? So his kids just kind of get, the shaft, if you will.
Yeah.
And the attorney that they're engaging with is like, we're going to change this, and we're going to explain why in that trust and give clarity to the reasoning behind everything, so that it can't be challenged. But the reason I'm bringing this up, guys, is you work with these people all the time, and that is a problem with diminished capacity. Mm-hmm. So how do you guys, number one, identify that someone can't complete an estate plan with you or legal documents with you because they don't have the capacity? And if you say that they don't, or you're like, I'm not willing to put my name behind this, what do they do, or what alternatives do they have?
You bring up a very good point. So the stressful part is that somebody can have diminished capacity, but they have capacity. And that's where the law hasn't caught up. So I think I'm the oldest guy in the room by far. But when I was growing up, a lot of people died in their 70s. All right. And that was in the 1970s. Now we have people regularly living in their 80s and 90s. And the law hasn't caught up with diminished, because diminished capacity, I mean, in Pennsylvania law, in a nutshell, capacity is, do you understand who the natural objects of your bounty are? Do you understand what your assets are? Do you understand, can you express an opinion as to where you want them to go? All right. But that's a very low threshold for capacity. All right. So that they can be a shadow of the person they were 10 or 15 years earlier and still have capacity to execute an estate document, even though if you knew if they were healthy, they would never do it that way. So what we really struggle with is the influence on those people who have a weakened mental state, but they still have capacity, and it's brutal. And we don't. I'd like to, I've studied it. I was on the Gift Plan Advisory Council at Penn State. We actually engaged a little bit with the Hershey Medical Center to talk about that. And frankly, I was looking for a silver bullet. I couldn't find one. And so it's an eternal struggle that's new. It's really new in the last 20 years. And in the world of law, we think new stuff is stuff that happened 50 or 100 years ago, let alone the last 20 years. It happened the last 20 years is so new we barely know what to do with it. So we've always engaged as a team, and we always have multiple members of our firm involved. If there's any question, if we think there's anything going on with influence or undue influence, there's always multiple members of the firm that are involved in the interviewing with that client. We obviously want to do the interview without somebody who may be exercising undue influence present. At a minimum, we excuse them, or we find a way that we meet with that person where there is no possible, to the best we can, mitigate any undue influence to make sure that we are capturing to the extent we can what their true intentions are. And so that's I don't have a better answer than that, but for the team approach and to report, as Brian said, to the Office of Aging, we have active aging here, which if we think that there's undue influence or abuse going on, we report it to them, and they have far greater investigatory powers. And attorneys get wrapped up in this thing called attorney-client privilege and being an advocate for the client, right? And our goal is to be an advocate for the client. But if the client has diminished capacity and they can express their capacity, but we think that they're being unduly influenced, but we can't prove it, we just get tied up in knots with our ethical rules and how that plays out. So you got to refer them to somebody else. And if somebody already has diminished capacity, then they get suspicious. Why are you referring me to somebody else? And it's very challenging. We much prefer to have the family involved, there are other professionals involved, and everybody pulling the oars in the same direction, even with diminished capacity, because then you know you're moving in the right direction.
At least with reasonable people agreeing, professionals agreeing that they're making decisions on their own. That's kind of some power behind making sure that they're okay at that point in time. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you saying?
So what I'm saying is that if you've had a group of professionals with a person who's now elderly and they've represented that person 10, 15 years, and so we know what their dispositive provisions are, their plan, all of a sudden they do a U-turn. And we had a client that was not associated with his family, disinherited children. In 25 years, had a very philanthropic plan and charities that this person was on the board for and made regular gifts to. All of a sudden, a year before he dies, he re-engages with his children, and the estate plan has zero philanthropy in it, and it all goes to the kids. It's like, well, that ended up being negotiated, but it's a very challenging because that person had capacity, but it very much seemed as though they were being unduly influenced.
And just to add a little bit more flavor for listeners who may not be entirely comfortable with the concept of capacity, is capacity and all of the elements that Tom mentioned are what occurs right now. Do they know their bounty? Do they know their assets? Do they know who they're giving it to? Can they express an intent? There's nowhere in that definition that says that they have to understand that by giving the money to the neighbor down the street, that it may negatively impact their grandkids 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. So it really is the lowest possible of bars when we're talking about the ability to bequeath one's assets.
And as I mentioned, it wasn't that big of an issue 30, 40 years ago, because I remember when my parents introduced me to this one gentleman who became a friend of theirs. He was 80 years old, and they said, and this is Joe, and he's 80 years old, because that was ancient in the 1970s. He's the only person we knew who made it to 80, and now that's regular, right? So
yeah, we just had an 80-year-old at wing night last night.
We did have an 80-year-old wing night last night.
Unlimited wings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my church, my pews are full of 70 plus year olds. Right. We got a nice little.
It's been good for churches, Jeremy.
Yeah. That's a whole other conversation about what happens in the next 20 years to the church. But I do think this is important. It's about the capacity thing is important. And I think, I feel like we talk about a lot of different issues and it keeps coming back to the same basic point, which is you need to have a team around you that understands, who you are, what your goals are, what your wishes are, both, I think, from, if you have them from a family perspective, your children, talking to your children about it. I just kind of went through this with my mom where I finally just came out and asked her, like, Mom, what's your plan? And I realized she didn't have one. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm driving to Albuquerque and we're going to put something together. So I've at least got the basic documents I need to take care of things that we need to take care of. And she didn't want to have that conversation because she doesn't want to think about a time when she's not able to make decisions for herself and all that kind of stuff. But she's in that mid-70s, age bracket where, Mom, we need to start talking about these things. And my two siblings just looked at me and I'm like, well, I guess I'm doing it, but you got to have. And so if you're concerned about your parent, it might be uncomfortable to ask the questions of them, like, okay, do you have documents? Do you have a plan? Where is that plan? Right. So, I mean, not that I need to read it right now, but I need to know where it physically exists in your home. One of my complicating factors in my life is my late wife was an only child. So I'm still have, connections with her mom because my kids are her only grandkids. And I'm still, engaged in her estate and her estate planning to make sure that it gets to her grandkids the way that she wants it to. But I have to, I'm the one left standing to kind of help do that engagement for her. But you got to have that and you got to have a team around you to do the work.
You guys have any tips on that? Because really the concept of the documents, especially, we're talking people who are now single in life primarily, whether by choice or by divorce or by being a widow or widower. Where do they keep their physical documents? What do you guys recommend and why?
So what we've been doing for a lot of years is we offer a service to our clients, so we'll keep the original documents if they want us to. So they have to say, hey, will you, the Knox law firm, retain our original documents? And if we do retain the original documents, they get fully executed notarized copies, hard copies, plus they get an electronic copy of it. So, all those can be utilized if they needed to be. But that's what we recommend. And then if we can get into the mode with the children and we have this transparency going on, then we send documents to the kids too with the client's authorization. It's all attorney-client privilege, so it has to be part of the client authorization. And then the third part is we try to do a very user-friendly short executive summary of what our lengthy legal documents say, along with a flow chart that's described it as non-attorneys, normal human beings could understand, so that we provide that clarity to the team that's involved as well as the client.
And Jeremy, to what you said earlier when you were talking about your planning, where you had these different permutations depending on who died first, that's all captured in the flow charting that we do. So people can visually see what happens if the husband dies and then the wife dies or vice versa. So it's really useful. And one other tip is a lot of times people will do their documentation and then they will abandon it and say it's done, I don't have to think about it. One of the things I've learned with Tom, with his wealth of experience, is a lot of times your power of attorney documents need to be updated because a lot of institutions won't want to accept something that is, more than 5-6 years old.
Yeah, those darn HIPAA laws too. And you guys now have to incorporate a separate HIPAA disclosure with your medical power of attorney, right? Like you can't have it in, well, I mean, you can, but it's a HIPAA disclosure built into it.
We have HIPAA disclosure in both our financial power of attorney and our healthcare power of attorney, because the financial power of attorney, even if they're not making healthcare decisions, they may need it and will need it to pay the bills.
Well, and in what year did that change too? Because that'd be a good knowledge for people. They're thinking like, when did I have my documents done? Do I need my HIPAA the disclosure in my medical power of attorney?
That was a long time ago. 20 years
Was
ago.
it in the 2000s or was it in the 90s? Yeah. 2000s. Okay, that's what I thought.
Early 2000s.
So if there's people out there that have a 90s,
90s, yeah.
You need to maybe think about getting your documents updated.
Yeah. Right. So I'll tell you one other thing that this is a little bit off target, but for your listeners, anybody, whether your grandparents or parents, one thing that happens, unfortunately, more often, and it's acute when it does, is they have their kids or grandkids go off to college, and they find out, the roommate or whatever, that their child is sick, and either at the collegiate infirmary or at a hospital. And the parents immediately, of course, want to call up and ask them how they're doing. And if they don't have the HIPAA waiver, which is usually through the financial power of attorney, they can't disclose any information for an adult child, right? And you're thinking, well, they're in college, they're not an adult child, I'm still paying the bills. But they are an adult child. So we regularly try to make sure that when kids go off to school, they've executed a healthcare power of attorney and financial power of attorney. And maybe just a rudimentary will to take care of anything that they have.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I've actually run across that.
I need to do that for my son. He's 20.
Yeah, you'd definitely need
Yeah,
to
I
do that.
definitely need to do that.
Yeah, we'll do that ASAP.
Yeah, but he's not at college. He's working. He didn't go to
Same
college. He's
concept,
working. But yeah, same concept.
Who else would
College
make
or
this-
not.
If he's in a car accident, he's at the hospital, you want to find out what's going on with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You kind of, I think as a parent, you just sort of assume it's automatic, but actually in the state of Colorado, you start losing access, I think at 14 to some of your kids, they start having a lot of autonomy over their healthcare, even at 14, because I've run into that with my daughter where I'm just like, no, I'm allowed to see this. I promise. And she had to go and,
Oh, sorry, Jeremy. Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, I think I remember there's at least one state where the state has applied that to even minor children who are enrolled in colleges. I want to say at 17. I don't remember the state off the top of my head, but that also comes up if adults are cohabitating. That's another concern because they're not going to have those rights either. So even if you're not married, there is some basic blocking and tackling that can be done in those situations.
And so back to your widow and widower theme, we've had a number of older folks that lose their spouse and they decide that they're going to cohabitate, and or we've had several decide they're going to be engaged indefinitely. And they feel and treat each other like spouses, but they don't have that connection. So again, they need to get those basic documents if they want to be able to assist with financial matters and healthcare issues.
yeah.
And for you guys, we're going back to the identifying if people have capacity. You guys do, I guess I should ask you, do you engage clients from afar? COVID kind of changed how business is done. So do you guys have clients outside of the physical realm where you're at? And how do you deal with that?
We do. And actually in Colorado, we get some local counsel out there. So we've done planning for Colorado clients without avoiding the illegal practice of law, because we always get local counsel in the area if it was really necessary. So we've got a group called Lawyer Associated Worldwide, and they've got we got law firms across the whole United States that we reach out to if we're engaged to do planning in a state where we're not licensed.
Okay, perfect. So that completely answers that question. So if there's clients that want to engage you, they can engage you from wherever they are.
Right, and we always disclose that we would use local counsel to make sure that I always tell them, all politics are local, and you want to make sure we don't want to engage in legal practice of law. Secondarily, we want to make sure that what we're planning to put together isn't going to be tripped up by a local rule that you couldn't research.
Yeah. You just didn't know what was going on. That's right.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of good stuff. This has been a meaty one.
Yeah. So to kind of put a bow on it, really what I've heard is we need to make sure that you have a team around you, which I love that you guys have that, because that's exactly where I am. And if you engage Brian, he's a team in himself because he's a CPA, a CFA,
he's an all-in-one team.
But having those people around you are just going to help you and guide you, and especially if there's more complications later in life, right?
Yeah.
So have that team, and then, I think that, I look at myself as a quarterback for most people, because how often do they talk to their attorney? How often do they talk to their CPA? I'm the one typically saying, let's go talk to the attorney. Let's go talk to the CPA. It's funny, guys. I had a client come in the other day that wanted to update their their power of attorney actually, and they did it online. They have a nice, by the way, estate plan, really robust, really good and meaty. Local attorney did it, and they want to just update their power of attorney, but they thought they were gonna have to pay the full price for the whole plan again.
Oh.
So they're just like, I'm just gonna go online and get this. And they came in to me because they needed to get it notarized, and we have a notary and all this stuff. But I'm like, whoa. Let's back up a second. Let's make sure that this plays together. I'm like, let me call the attorney and see what he would recommend. He called them. He's like, well, if they do that, they can do that. But now they have, a piecemeal plan, and, all of the things that they're putting in there aren't going to line up with their will, their trust, their da-da-da-da. He's like, so, they need to do this is what I recommend. And the price was, a fraction of the full price.
Right.
But you're still doing work. You got to pay for the time and the expertise.
Sure.
But it was minuscule compared to what he had in his head, right? So that's me saying, guys, stop, right? Like, we need to make sure we do this properly. You have a really great plan. Let's not blow it up just because you want to save a couple $100.
Yeah.
Let me give you one other advice on AI. So the other day, I had a client and he wanted to talk about planning opportunities in our state, Pennsylvania, and he'd done some research and he was wrong. And I said, well, let's put this in Chat GPT. So I put it in Chat GPT. So you read that's a good query. I said, yep, put it in, and it came up and gave him the same answer he had. I said, okay, now let's modify that prompt. I modified the prompt by putting in the Chat GPT what the real law was. And then Chat GPT comes with, it's good that you pushed back because, that is a different rule in Pennsylvania. All right. And so whether you're looking online, you're doing your own Google work, or you're using an AI model, I can tell you that every time I use that for healthcare, my doctor says, yeah, that's right for most people, not for you though. So, I'm guilty of using it for my own, trying to get a health, but it's infrequently wrong or moves you in a direction that's not correct. When people are doing self-help legal work.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have a podcast coming up about technology as we age, and one of those is going to be the AI things that are coming about, and there's good and bad, but we need to understand it to be able to use it properly and actually use it in a way that's going to help our lives and not hurt us.
The good,
having
the good
a
or the
piecemeal plan that's not good for Pennsylvania is not going to help them at all.
No.
At the end of the time, right? Guys, thank you so much. But having that team, do you guys have contact information you'd like? You can say it now, or I can put it in the description to our listeners if they wanted to.
Make sure that Sarah sends it to you so you can include it, please.
Perfect. We'll put it in the description, everybody, so you can check that out. And Jeremy?
We'll put the link below to the proper Google website, which will be good to go. But I do really appreciate this. I think this is our, we have a continuing theme around here of things people need to think about that they don't want to, which I'm sure is like your guys' bread and butter, like day in and day out of life, because, nobody, the best case, unfortunately, sometimes the best case scenario is you put all these plans together and you don't use them, or you get to a point in life where it's all the worst case scenarios you're working through. Like, obviously we don't want those things to happen, but unfortunately we live in a world where things happen. That's right. I think being able to think about it, getting that team around you is really important. So thank you to our wonderful guests joining us from afar. I appreciate your time and energy. And of course, I always really appreciate our guests and you guys listening out there. We do this because you listen. So if you know somebody who might be in a situation like this, maybe they've got a parent they might be thinking or wondering about, maybe share this episode with them so they can learn a little bit about how they might be able to protect themselves, protect the people around us that we love, get that team around you so you can hope everybody sleep well at night knowing things are taken care of. So thank you, our guests.
Thank you.
Credentialed Wealth Advisors is a Securities and Exchange Commission registered investment advisor. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as an offer for investment advice or the purchase or sale of any security, insurance, or other investment product. All investments involve risk, including the potential loss of principal. Before implementing any strategy discussed, individuals should consult with a qualified financial, tax, or legal professional. While the data presented is sourced from materials believed to be reliable, its completeness and accuracy cannot be guaranteed.